Next, without further ado, please allow me to welcome Mr. James Leggett to give introduction over DPDK community update around the globe.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for welcoming me to China and all of you for joining me here today. My talk today will take about the next 35 minutes, and I'm going to touch on two subjects. First, I want to share with you the growth and the strength of the DPDK community. It's been tremendous how far we've come. I'd like to thank Hetching as well and his team for driving some of the work through our local team here in Shanghai. They're clearly a strong part of the DPDK community here locally and in China. And finally seeing that book come out is terrific news for me. That's been something we've talked about in the community and within Intel for quite a while now, and it's fantastic to see that come to fruition to help build the next generation of network developers based on DPDK technologies. The second part of my talk, I'm going to introduce you to a project we launched in February called Fast Data, or FDIO. It also goes by the name of Fido, named after the mascot you'll see in that project. So let me jump right into some of the DPDK content. It may surprise some of you to know that the DPDK project today is up to 1.6 million lines of code. That's a pretty significant growth from where we started out in 2010 with the very first release. And I'd like to thank all of you in this audience and around the world who are contributors to the project that helped make this happen. If you take an average engineer's salary, in total the community's invested almost $26 million worth of investment in this project. And it truly shows the strength of open source communities and open source projects. Because since all of this code is available for all of us to use, it helps us share in some of the research and development aspects of building accelerated packet processing data plane solutions. I'll show you some data later on the number of commitments and the number of contributors, but that's grown significantly in the community as well. The other thing I'll point out on this slide is the multiple architecture support. I'm sure all of you know that when Intel started this project in 2010, we launched it with support for Intel architecture. But over the years, there's been additional architecture support, and today we sit here with support for Power architecture and also ARM and Telera also. So it's grown significantly on architectural support as well as community contributions. This shows the strength and breadth of the community support. I talked about the architectural support. This has been going on for quite a few years. Power was done, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. There was an IBM team in China that played a significant role in getting the Power architecture completed, as well as some of the Freescale and NXP folks. EasyChip, which is today owned by Mellanox, also had their Tile GX architecture supported. And of course, at the end of last year, ARM v7 and ARM v8 architectures were also added in the community through work done by Intel for some of our ARM products, a company in Europe called Rehive Technologies, and of course Cavium Networks also. Today, Cavium Networks is the maintainer for the ARM architectural repository in the community, showing the breadth of the community well beyond just Intel and some of the other major contributors and stakeholders. If you look across the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Ethernet devices that are supported. And again, when we started our work on this project, our job, of course, was to have support for Intel multi 1 gigabit ports, 10 gigabit ports and devices, 40 gigabit devices, and our latest 100 gig device as well. But as the project developed and had traction, there's different customers in the industry who are looking for a portfolio of solutions from companies like Mellanox and Chelsea and Broadcom. And these companies and some of their software partners also stepped up and engaged the community and provided pull mode drivers for their devices. So what you see in front of you today is a very, very strong, robust community. It's very open. It's open to multiple architectures, and it's open to multiple Ethernet devices. And if there's any other architectures that someone thinks is missing, I welcome and encourage them to come and contribute some of that code into the project. I talked a minute ago about community growth. This is just a sample of both the number of contributors and the number of commits over the past 2+ years or so, ending with our most recent release, 16.04, that came out in April of this year. I want to point out a few things on this. One is the continued upward trend of both the number of contributors and the number of committers. It's fantastic to see this chart continuing to go up and to the right. That's really showing the strength of the community, the passion of the developers in the community, and the importance of this community for new people to engage it and contribute to it. The other thing I want to point out is something that we don't often talk about, is that 1/3 of the contributors and commitments to this project are coming from developers here in China. I think that's fantastic to see because it shows the global presence of the Data Plane Development Kit. Of course, a big part of that is our local team here in Shanghai, but there's many other folks in this audience and some who couldn't make it here today who are also instrumental in contributing to this project. And for all of you, I thank you for your contributions today and your contributions to come tomorrow. If you're wondering who's contributing to the project, I often get told, well, isn't it mostly just Intel and a few other guys? This shows you the facts of the matter. It is an extremely broad, robust community of contributors. Now, these contributors contribute to different levels, of course. In the case of Amazon, if you saw in the previous slide, there was something called ENA, Elastic Network Adapter. When they have specific needs in their cloud infrastructure, they'll come into the project, contribute what they need, and then they largely go and work the rest of it behind the scenes. I think many of the vendors on here do something similar. But there's quite a few that are constantly engaged in the project. People like Red Hat, people like Cavium Networks, people like Brocade, people like Linaro, Alibaba gets engaged in it pretty often, people like Sixwind and Cisco. These are companies that you'll constantly see on the developer list, contributing code, asking questions, and answering questions from other people. It's exactly what an open source community is supposed to do and how it's supposed to function. The community exists for all of us. It exists for you, it exists for you, and it exists for you. If you aren't currently active in the community, I would strongly encourage you to at least subscribe to the developer list and get a sense of the types of conversations that happen. What we often see is that a problem one person is having is often a similar problem that other people happen. So please take a look at that if you're not doing that today. The other thing I want to talk about here is how easy it is to get engaged in the community. And I won't read to you, this is our top 10 list of developers. And what you'll see is quite a few of these are from right here in China. I want to point out 2 of them. Lu Wenzhou, he has been our top committer, and he's only been on the project for 11 months. So he went from not engaged at all to the #1 guy in under a year. I think that's fantastic. Liu Yuanhan, he is a maintainer for an extremely important part of the project, Vert.io, to help enable and improve our virtualized infrastructure and virtualized implementation. He also has only been on this project for less than a year. And what I really want to impart to you here is that if you're not engaged in the project today and you're a developer who's interested or using it, I strongly encourage you, get your name on this list next year. So when I stand on this stage 1 year from now, I'm pointing you out as one of the top committers in the project. It's very straightforward and easy to do. I'll talk about some of the steps at the end of how to become a contributor or committer to the Data Plane Development Kit project. And I would like to thank all of these folks on this list today, plus others that are contributing to the project right now. We made a significant change to the project at the end of last year. And when I say we, I specifically mean our community itself. This is not a change by Intel, this is a change in the community. And that's worth pointing out because the conversations about the way we direct the community, the way we organize it, the way we make decisions, they all happen online in the forums, in the community calls, and in conversations at events like this one. Speaking of which, I want to encourage all of you at this event to get to know the people around you, get to know the other people that are contributing to DPDK, and get to know the people that are using DPDK. This event is designed to bring together our community in a face-to-face environment so that you look more than just an email name on a forum or a voice on a community call. So please take some time during the break and get to meet a few new faces while you're here today. In Q4 of last year, we had a conversation about our release cycle and our naming nomenclature for the project. Prior to this, we were using a 1.x, 2.x naming cycle, and our final release of last year was 2.2. The community decided they wanted to adopt what we call the Ubuntu model of using the year and the month for a release. So for example, in April of this year, we released the 16.04 release, and we're now currently working on 16.07, which will come out in July. And the next release after that will be 16.11, which of course will come out in December. This makes the release elements and the release descriptors much more obvious to, of course, the folks in the community, which are pretty intimately familiar with them already, but it makes it easy to understand for those TEMs and service providers and cloud carriers downstream who are consuming it to understand what does 16.04 mean. Clearly, that came out in April of 2016. So for the people using it that are not involved in it every day, it makes it a lot easier for them to look at our release cadence and understand when that release came out and what's coming next. The bottom line on this line talks about where we're going next year. So we also decided that we're going to transition from a 3 release per year to a 4 release cycle per year. So you'll see in 2017, 4 releases targeted on here. 1702, 1705, 1708, and 1711. By having short release cycles, the community felt that it will give them an opportunity to be more on time and on track delivering those releases because there'll be a smaller feature set. And also, if a feature becomes something that the community has to work harder on to get consensus, they can push it to the next release cycle and you won't lose a larger chunk of time. So this new release cycle should provide tremendous flexibility to the community itself, and we hope that you as users and developers will give us some feedback on this and participate in these releases. I want to talk a little bit on how to contribute to the DPDK community. It's so simple, a child could do it. The first thing you have to do, of course, is think about what your use in the community is. Are you someone who needs to be a contributor because you want to influence the direction and the feature set of the project? Or are you someone who's a consumer who's going to take the releases and then integrate those into a VNF or into your cloud application or your accelerated switch or whatever the right model is? And both sides are good. In either case, I want to encourage you to get on the developer list because even if you're just a consumer, your voice needs to be heard in the community so the developers understand how their work is being used out in the real world. You need to let them know what's working. You need to let them know when you find a bug, or you find something that's broken, or when you're having trouble on it. So please get involved in both sides of that. The other thing that I'll point out, I talked earlier about how some of our top community contributors today started as recently as 8 months ago. Anyone can do this, and I encourage you to get involved and just start out small. If you need help on a project to work on, I've had some people come to me at prior summits saying, hey, I want to contribute, but I don't know where to start. There's lots of needs in the community of people that will give you things to work on. I think all you need to do is join the forum and say, is there a project here I can help with? Or if you have a particular interest in performance, NIC optimization, container implementation, any of those kind of areas, there's lots of opportunities for you to get involved in the community. The third bullet talks about clean code, and what this really is the maintainers are constantly pinging the developers to fix their code to make sure it's clean, make sure their comments and supporting documentation is thorough, and also make sure that someone else has reviewed their code, acknowledged it, tested it before it gets committed to the tree. The better job you can do at either doing that with your own code or helping someone else improve their code, the more the maintainers like you as a contributor. So that's a great way to build your own reputation. And that's something else I should point out, especially for the younger people in the room. If you're looking for a way to improve your career, building a name for yourself in a high visibility, important open source community is a terrific way to start. In the US, my engineers and developers are constantly telling me that they're regularly getting job offers because of their DPDK skills. Now that makes it challenging for me to make sure that they stay working for Intel in our world, but it's very nice to know that the skills that you develop are in demand in the industry. We call that job security where I come from. The last couple things on here, you should expect that development in an open source community, if you haven't been engaged, takes time. You're putting yourself in the open, showing people your work, and asking them to comment on it. And they will comment in two directions. They will comment to say, that looks terrific, and they will comment to say, why did you do it that way? You should do it this way instead. And the end result is always a better product. That conversation happening before the product's released always makes that product better. And the last thing, I really want to contribute you to get engaged through all the avenues we have. So I thank you again for being here today, because these summits and face-to-face meetings are a terrific way to meet people and get involved in the community. And for those who are interested, our next summit will be in San Jose on August 10th and 11th in the US, so I welcome everybody to join us there. And the third summit for Europe will be, I believe it's October 20th and 21st in Dublin, Ireland. The summit in Ireland tends to be very, very focused on the major community developers. So if you want the one event where pretty much all the big developers, including many from our local team here in Shanghai, show up, that's the place to be. So I would welcome and encourage all of you to join that. The other aspects, we host community calls on the forum, and we try to rotate them so that they're time zone friendly to Europe and then time zone friendly to Asia. Those of you who work in a global environment, which is probably all of us know, it's never easy to find a time that works for everyone. So we rotate those and do the best we can. We find ourselves, we may get up at 6 a.m. in the States, and some of our team here may be up at 10 or 11 o'clock at night joining some of these calls. But I welcome your participation to listen in on those calls, bring up topics, and contribute some information to them. And lastly, if you're someone who prefers chat sessions, we have IRC channels set up for DPDK as well that you can join at any time. There's almost always someone on there with some kind of conversation going on, and it's a great way to get a question answered very quickly if the right person happens to be on the channel. So, in summary on the DPDK session, I would just encourage you to get involved in the project if you aren't already, and I would thank you for your continuous involvement if you are right now. I'm going to transition now over to the Fast Data project. By show of hands, how many people in this room have heard of FD.io already? A few folks, okay, so I'll assume then it's mostly new for everyone else. So I'll spend a little bit of time on this one. If you think about a cloud network stack today, these are many of the open source projects that I'm sure yourselves and perhaps some of your other companies are involved in. I know from an Intel perspective, I believe we have engineering engagement on virtually every one of these different projects out here. But when you look at this whole stack up, when you look at the area around data plane services and packet processing, there really wasn't a comprehensive open source project that met the needs of what we're trying to build here in the cloud. There are components like DPDK, which is doing the I/O acceleration and trying to build up additional functionality, but there's nothing collectively that's offering user space stacks and IPsec solutions and routing protocols and a bunch of other elements. So this was identified in 2015 as a gap. And Cisco came to us with a conversation and said, hey, we think we have an opportunity here to build a community to go after this problem and tackle this head on. And that's what became Fast Data. The goals of the Fast Data project are pretty simple. So first and foremost, high performance. Nobody needs another data plane solution that won't meet the needs of the telecom and datacom industry. You have to be able to move small packets very, very quickly. It's exactly why DPDK was started, and that's why DPDK is the foundational piece of FD.io. Second is to make sure it's modular and extensible. We want to make sure that the components that are in this project, that someone who's consuming them can look at them and just decide which are the right components they want to use and then go and implement them in their own environment. We want to make sure it's open source with a very strong open source governance. There have been projects out there that, rightly or wrongly, are accused of being kind of insular and not welcoming to outside views and opinions. We wanted FD.io to be a project that welcomed in everyone and anyone who wanted to contribute, no matter what their views were, no matter what their company was, no matter what their architecture was, no matter what devices they wanted to bring into their project. It had to be completely open. It had to be multi-vendor and interoperable. So we started from the beginning. We knew it had to support multiple architectures. And in the cloud space today, that means Intel architecture, Power architecture, and ARM architecture, predominantly. And that's where the project started as founding principles for it. From there, we looked at some of the components of it. And we knew that there's two types of projects out in the world. The ones that start with an idea. And an idea is a fantastic place to start. But when you start with an idea and no code, it takes a very long time to develop that project to something that's consumable by downstream users or people trying to build devices for networks and cloud. In this case, we had DPDK as a foundational element, so we started from a very strong place to begin with. And then Cisco has a product they call Vector Packet Processing, or VPP, that they've been working on since the early 2000s. Cisco's been shipping VPP as a commercial networking software for a very long time. If you want to read more about it, you can just do a search on Cisco and VPP, and there's plenty of information out there. So they made a commitment to this project to say, hey, I'm going to take my commercial quality code, and I'm going to contribute it to this project. It was a very bold move by Cisco, and I think the community is tremendously appreciative for them for doing it. The other thing we knew is that we wanted to support the three major implementation models. We, of course, had to support bare metal native box implementations. We knew we had to support virtualized implementations and VMs. And we also knew that there was a tremendous momentum for containers. And containers, of course, how many people are working on containers today? Anyone working on containers? A few folks, maybe. So there's a lot of work in containers happening in the cloud space, and we knew we needed an implementation model that worked there as well. So that's kind of where we started. I'm clearly not going to read this list for a bunch of, the networking developers. This is your go-to list of networking protocols and switching protocols. And this is a list of what's in VPP. So we went from the things we had in DPDK, from accelerated I/O, to a portfolio of capabilities in stacks and routing and switching protocols that were the kind of things we've been trying to build out for years. And all of a sudden, with the creation of fast data, these were now available for everyone as open source software. And this is a phenomenal disruptor in the community because nowhere else do all these components come together where all of us can go work on them, test them, stitch them together in different ways, and tune more performance out of them. So it's a huge, huge opportunity for us collectively. When this project launched in February of this year, there were 13 members. The membership was like many of the large open source projects like Open Daylight, OpenNFV, and others that had a tier structure for membership. You had silver members join it at a kind of a general level, gold members joined it at a mid-tier level, and platinum members who really stepped up and contributed both from a code contribution, from a developer resource contribution, and of course from a financial contribution, because it does take money to make these projects work. So I want to thank everyone who stepped up and joined that, and I do have some news as of a few days ago that the Freescale NXP folks have also just joined Fast Data. So the membership is starting to grow, and I'll talk in a minute about some of the contribution growth as well, as to how well the community itself is developing. The structure of the project, I talked about how DPDK is a foundational element. I talked about how VPP is the initial contribution code. But we also realized that the usability of FD.io really is going to be heavily dependent on us stitching together the ability to use it in Open Daylight, OpenStack, and many other cloud stack environments. So with that in mind, there were several projects that were formed, some at the very beginning and some as the project has evolved. First and foremost, we added a continuous system integration and testing lab. That's a physical space where the code is constantly tested in a continuous integration environment. We're using Jenkins for that. That's to make sure the performance is never broken for the project as people add code in. The Honeycomb agent is designed to connect FD.io into Open Daylight, and that's maturing along here. There's an NSH service function chaining element that actually one of our Intel engineers, Danny Joe, is contributing to as well, to set up service function chaining as an element that you can define in this project also. There's an overlay network engine that's designed, of course, to look at network overlays it's building out now. Last week, some of my colleagues from Intel announced a transport layer dev kit, and this is designed to bring a host user space stack into the community. And I should add, I should have mentioned this earlier, all of the code in FD.io is designed to run in user space. We absolutely agree that there's a space for the Linux kernel stack, but in most cases, running telco infrastructure with small packets and small latency requirements, the current status of the kernel networking stack is not going to meet your needs. And that's why most of the people have moved to DPDK models and now hopefully moving to fast data models to implement it in user space. There's a VPP sandbox, and this area is really for people that look at the core VPP code and say, hey, here's a way to tweak this part and adjust this part to make it faster. And that's a place you can contribute your code. The VPP maintainer will look at it, and then if he agrees with it, they'll merge it into the mainstream patch for VPP. And the last one is fast data stacks. And fast data stacks is not within the FIDO project, but actually is over in OPNFV. So what it's designed to do is take the virtual switching functionality from fast data and let you use it as an alternative to OVS over in OPNFV project. So this is another area where projects are converging to help and support each other. So if you think about the stack on the right-hand side, you've got fast data that's got a dependency on DPDK, that's got an intersection with Open Daylight, that's got an intersection with OPNFV. And we know there are more to come. So we welcome you to think about some of these areas and get involved here too. The other thing I wanted to share is while this project has only been out now for 3 months, it already has ramped from 0 at start to 76 different contributors to the project. And we continue to grow the number of projects out here. So I think it's a fascinating new project for all of us to take a look at and get involved in. And just to show you where Intel's involved in these projects, I've mentioned a few of these earlier, but these are the places here on the left with the blue arrows where Intel has resources directly assigned to support these projects within fast data. And for us, it's really a question of where we think we have expertise and where we think we have an ability to influence and help improve the performance and capability on these type of sub-projects. Lastly, I want to ask you to do a couple things on this. Not that many hands went up at the beginning when I asked how many people were familiar with it. So first and foremost, if you're a developer or someone who used to be a developer, let's say get your laptop back out, go and download the code. Like I said, it's 100% open sourced. At the fd.io website, you'll see a tab called Community. I've pasted the URL into here. When you go to that page, you'll have a set of options from download the code, go to the wiki page and read about it, go take some training tutorials, etc. Download the code yourself, try it out, run it, and see what kind of results you get. Go to the forums and read some of the posts there. I think the most common thing that happens when I see people follow this course of action today is the first thing they post is, hey, I tried the code, and rather than get this level of performance, I get this level of performance. And what ensues is a very rapid conversation about what they're doing wrong. Hey, here's the flags you have set wrong. Here's the setup you have wrong. Here's how to configure your ports. What kind of NIC are you using? What kind of processor are you on, etc. And that's how the rapid growth and engagement of the community is happening. And I encourage you to be a part of that. I'll give you an example recently. As much as this project is significantly run on high-performance processors, such as our Intel Xeons, there's also people out today trying to run it on Raspberry Pis. So it's running on everything from as small as a Raspberry Pi with ARM core in it, all the way up to a high-performance Intel Xeon E5 processor, and every point in between. So I'm sure that's the kind of project that will probably meet most people's opportunities or needs in this audience here today. There are several different developer lists in the project and community itself. There's a developer list for the technical steering committee, so you can follow the conversations around technical governance. And then there are developer lists for each of the sub-projects. There's one for VPP, there's one for the Honeycomb agent, there's one for the transport layer dev kit, etc. If those topics are interesting for your work, at a minimum, I'd suggest you subscribe to them to follow along the kind of code developments that are happening in the community today. You likely will want to know about the transport layer dev kit if you're working on user space stack implementations. If you're working on Open Daylight, you might want to subscribe to the Honeycomb agent to follow that intersection. If you're working on OPNFV, you want to look at the Open FastPath area, Open FastAx, and understand how that connects in as well. So go and figure out which developer lists are relevant for yourself. And then get involved in the conversations. Participate in the discussions, submit your questions. There are regular calls in the community. There is a technical steering call that's open to everyone worldwide that happens every Thursday. There is a VPP project call that happens every Tuesday, and that acts as kind of the single consolidated call for the entire community itself. There's lots of conversations there, not only about VPP, but also about the additional sub-projects that happen in the community as well. And those are very interactive. They run an IRC channel during it, they run an audio call during it, and they run a WebEx slide sharing opportunity during it as well. So they give you many means to communicate and absorb that information during that call. And lastly, contribute to the project. This is no different than any other open source project, no different than DPDK. The success or failure of any project, including FD.io, will be based specifically on the community. If we decide that the value that this project is presenting to the industry is worth it, then we will step up, we will contribute code, we will consume code, and we will provide feedback on it. And that's how the community will nurture itself, improve itself, and build and grow. So that next time we talk about it, we'll be talking about even further growth and contributions and number of contributors to it as well. We'll be talking about how FD.io is now enabling new cloud implementation models and new levels of performance that weren't seen in years past. I personally am very excited about it. And again, I want to encourage you to take a look and get excited about it as well. I think that's all I have for today. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the day today and spending a little time talking to you during the breaks as well. Thank you.
About DPDK community around the globe. We still have 2 or 3 minutes left. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Anyone would like to ask a question? So if no further questions, this will be a big picture for DPDK community around the globe.